video, Dr. Anna Traianou is looking at the characteristics of a good science teacher.
Set out to investigate this question: what does it mean to be an expert primary science practitioner? What subject or pedagogical or even research knowledge primary teachers need to possess in order to be effective in their teaching? But at least in the past 20 or 30 years, the influence of constructivist theories of learning and teaching have shaped this debate in particular ways. What constructivism implied for primary science expertise. For instance, we can take into account that children have some ideas, but these have to be treated as wrong ideas, and therefore teachers need to introduce them straight away into the correct scientific concept. There are others who are more progressive, in their thinking, which argue that other versions of constructivism, which argue that, well, no, the starting point for good teaching should be children's ideas and should be given opportunities to reflect on their understanding, to test their ideas against practical activities, and so on. It seemed to me that all versions of constructivism tend to develop models about what is effective, expert primary science teaching, based on some research. Therefore, imply that research knowledge should then be transformed into teachers' professional development courses so that teachers can acquire maybe the correct approach to science teaching and become effective in their teaching in this way. And in my investigation to what it means to be an expert primary practitioner, I questioned all these assumptions about the role of research has in teaching. So try and see how expert science practitioners act in their own teaching, in their own classroom. I used a sociocultural approach to do this, which basically meant finding an expert practitioner and observing her teaching and talking to her.
And how did you find this teacher?
Oh, well, through various links and people that I knew. I met Cora, who of course this name is a pseudonym, but she worked in an inner city school in Northern England. She had been working for about 7 years. She had published some papers. She was an advisor in her local education authority, the science coordinator of her school. So I thought she was a good example of what we could call an expert science practitioner. Cora would teach science once per week for about 3 hours, and she would also teach smaller sessions, shorter sessions throughout the week. Because I started with collecting observational data and interview data, Coral sent me an email, and that image had also included an attachment, which was part of what she called her class diary, because she decided to start writing her thoughts about what went on during her teaching. And she carried on doing this throughout our collaboration.
And then you also went in and observed her teach.
I did. I also interviewed children as well. Some of the children there, and I also interviewed her more formally. What was interesting is to realize how complex her views, her perspectives, and her teaching was. It was full of dilemmas, concerns about what to do and what not to do in her teaching. And I found that extremely interesting, because it basically contradicted quite a lot of what was written and what is said even nowadays about effective or good science teaching. The first one is the tension between teaching children a body of scientific knowledge, which is specified in some government documents or the National Curriculum for England, or it is considered important for science educators themselves, and acknowledging that knowledge is useful if it is constructed by children themselves, acknowledging that children are capable actually of constructing understanding, and therefore you have to take into account their initial views, their perspectives, their ideas that they have developed throughout their everyday interactions with the physical world. She sees science as a body of knowledge. She does believe that science includes a body of knowledge. But she also thinks that science is about a way of thinking. It's what she calls logical thinking, a set of procedures and processes that scientists employ. So she wants children to learn this body of knowledge, and she wants children to develop this logical way of thinking. And she talked about it. But at the same time, she also said that she's very aware that children, think a lot about what is happening around them from a very young age. So they develop quite many ideas about scientific concepts.
Mm-hmm.
She gives an example. After all, from the time a baby drops something out of the pram and looks down and not up, he or she is developing concepts about forces.
Okay. So why is that a dilemma? Like, why can't you start with one or the other?
Because I think she felt that if you want to take into account children's starting point,
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to know how to teach a body of knowledge which is outside what it feels right, what it feels real for the children. She sees the body of knowledge out there and what children think to be slightly different,
Okay.
or very different sometimes. She's very interested in probing, eliciting children's ideas. She uses a range of methods to try to get children to think about their own ideas about forces in gravity and air resistance and so on. But she's also aware that not all of these ideas are the result of what she calls real thinking.
So when she talks about real thinking, what does that mean?
Thinking that involves children reflecting on their understanding, thinking that is the result of children use of specific ideas to live successfully or carry out an activity successfully. But at the same time, she knows that many of what the children say, yes, it is the result of real thinking, but she hasn't got time to explore all of it because she comments, I think, children think too much too fast.
Yes,
She says that it's very central in her teaching. She gives an example again. She wrote it in her diary that she did a session on gravity and air resistance, and one child asked a question about the direction of air resistance, which she didn't discuss it any further.
Okay.
And then she wrote later on in her diary, well, it could have led to an interesting discussion about directional forces and air resistance opposing movement.
Yeah.
And she feels this to be a very, very real problem in her teaching, because she thinks that, well, okay, she shows an interest in exploring children's ideas, but as she wrote again in her diary, she ignores almost all of them. It is a tension. You've got to teach this body of knowledge, but if you do respect children's thinking, real thinking, the one that they use in their everyday life, the one that it is the result of their reflection, then how can you manage all this? The richness of children's thinking
ideas
and interest as well, and the very specific objectives that she needs to fulfill to meet and for all of them as well. And then, of course, on top of this, that she needs to care for all of the children in her classroom, not only for one or two. Another, which is close as well, is whether science is a body of knowledge or science is a process. It's primarily about learning the procedures and processes of science.
Okay.
Well, she sees that as a dilemma because she believes that what she calls the logical thinking is very fundamental in children's learning. And she wants to spend a lot of time helping children to become good at it, to become good at asking scientific questions and setting up practical activities and investigating their questions and so on. Yes, she really believes that children need to get engaged with practical activities. But in her teaching, she doesn't think that they can discover ideas through